Well, we've come to the third installment of the John Wick franchise, and maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but this might be my favorite of the franchise, at least so far. We'll see what Chapter 4 has for us next week. But watching this one again, it really holds up. John Wick 3 Parabellum. And again, kind of a weird naming convention change. The first two just kind of had John Wick and a number. This one felt the need to have a subtitle. But John Wick 3 really does pick up where John Wick 2 left off. John Wick is on the run. He's got a hit out on him. It's $14 million for John Wick to be dead because, again, he killed Santino D'Antonio on continental grounds, which is a double offense in the eyes of the high table. So yeah, they kind of don't want to waste time killing this guy. And right away, this movie gets your blood pumping. There's a real sense of urgency because you know that this contract is going live in a certain amount of time and the clock's ticking and John needs to get his faculties together. He's got to get resources. He's got to find a way out before everybody in Manhattan is coming after him. And so his first stop is to the New York Public Library to get some supplies. He's got this secret book that's hollowed out, and in it he's got a marker, he's got a rosary, and he's got a few coins, for emergencies. I'm pretty sure this qualifies, but while he's getting that, there's this big Russian dude that corners him in the library and is thinking, well, if I kill you a few minutes early, nobody's really gonna know the difference, so yeah, we'll just get it over with. And they have a pretty intense fight in the library, and it's really cool to see because, again, this is the first 5 minutes of the movie. You're already getting thrown into an action sequence, and it's super creative. The way John's using the book as a weapon and is just beating this dude to death, it's a pretty dope fight, and it showcases, again, how these stunt coordinators, stunt performers, and producers and directors, they're constantly improving their craft and how to deliver satisfyingly creative John Wick action, because every one of these movies steps up the action compared to its predecessor. And this fight in the library is a perfect introductory example of the kind of action we're going to get here. It's going to be a lot more diverse with the types of action, the different weapons at play, the different things that usually aren't seen as weapons that can be used as weapons in this format. And overall, we get longer takes, more impressive cinematography, and just a more complex staging of all of this action. But even though John does end up killing this big Russian dude, he does get stabbed right in the shoulder and he needs to get stitched up. He's only got like 10 minutes left, so he goes to his doctor, the guy from the first movie, and he stitches John up, but right before he's done stitching him up, he runs out of time, so John kind of has to finish the job himself. And it seems like that stab wound is a pretty minor detail, but it is something that keeps coming up over the course of this movie, and it serves right away to put John on the back foot. Even though he's already on the back foot, he's got all of New York after him, he can't use any of the continental resources. Seems like there's nobody that he can call on for help. Oh, and let's give him a knife wound in the shoulder that's not fully healed, and he has to take pain meds to just get through the next 2.5 hours of this movie. And it's such a great device because, again, it makes him feel vulnerable. Even though John is doing these impossible things, he's impossibly gifted at killing. He's basically a superhero at this point. We know it. We've seen what he can do. That wound still humanizes him where we're like, oh yeah, if he's not careful, he can and will die. And from here on, the whole movie really is just John Wick trying to survive and trying to find the person above the high table that could potentially get him exonerated, getting him back into the organization, or just giving him some peace. I guess he's not really sure what he wants at this point, but if he can stick it to the high table and just find some semblance of peace, that's a win. And if you remember in my last video how I talked about that movie feeling like a transition film from the very personal and intimate dog revenge story that was the first John Wick into this more epic, bigger scale, globe-trotting adventure story that the series would become, this is the movie that fully takes advantage of that globe-trotting adventure. John Wick, man on the run, trying to stick it to the high table any way he can. Although this movie has a slight spin on it to keep it continuous with the last movie where he is on the run throughout basically the entire runtime of this movie. He is a man hunted and he is desperately seeking any kind of solution or solace that he can get. But before we get to that, we have another action sequence to talk about, and that's the weapons cabinet fight scene. It's shortly after the contract goes live and you have this gang of guys trying to kill John Wick, of course. And they're in this like weapons vault gun store thing with all these glass cabinets of various weapons and firearms. And the scene opens with another small detail which I just love, and it's John Wick getting a revolver. It's this very westerny looking old school revolver, and he's loading it and it jams or something wrong with it, so he disassembles the revolver on camera and he clears the jam and then he puts it back together. And it's a small detail, but it really does speak to the overall feeling of competency that just permeates this John Wick franchise. Clearly either the writer, the director, the stunt team, somebody, or really given the people involved, I wouldn't be surprised if everybody had some working knowledge of firearms, firearm safety, trigger discipline, assembling and disassembling firearms. Because I could probably count on one hand the number of Hollywood movies that actually showcase real world knowledge of firearms and everything that implies. But really, John Wick is the one major Hollywood franchise that proves that if you take the weapons seriously and you depict that realistically, it not only adds to the believability of the film, it also just heightens the drama and the tension when you know things can go wrong with the guns, that you can run out of ammo, that a gun can jam, that all these issues that you could face in the real world when they happen to John Wick or the enemies or somebody, it ups the stakes, it ups the tension, and you see how they improvise through that. And it's just so refreshing to see that here. And on top of that, the stunt choreography is just incredible. During this whole cabinet fight, people are taking weapons off the walls and throwing them at each other. There's a lot of knives and short swords just going into people's heads and shoulders and body parts. It is just madness in the best way possible. And it just escalates from there, because as we go a little bit further, John Wick ends up in one of these stables, and I don't really know where this stable came from. I don't know where all these horses came from, but he's trying to get a horse so he can run off into the sunset and escape all these people. But again, people come out of the woodwork and he's cornered, and he actually uses the horse as a weapon. He slaps the horse on the side and it kicks back and it kicks dudes in the head, killing them. And that sequence is a lot of fun and super creative too. But John Wick does eventually find some allies, and it's in this Russian ballet place, and it's run by the Ruska Roma, who are this clan of Russian gypsies, and it's led by Angelica Houston. And apparently John Wick is part of that tribe, and he's owed something because of that. He's got that rosary, so I guess that's his ticket out of the city, and they can smuggle him out on these boats, which she reluctantly agrees to, but she does agree to it because, again, pulling the whole family card. So now John is off to Casablanca to figure out how he's gonna get himself out of this mess. But while he's away, we have a new wrinkle in the story, and it's in the character of the adjudicator. And she's this woman that works for the high table, and she's here basically to adjudicate what went down in the Continental, who broke the rules, and who needs to be punished. And she goes and visits a few different people. She visits Winston and figures out that Winston just kind of let it happen. Not only did he opt to not interfere with the murder of D'Antonio, but he also basically let John go, gave him a head start, which strictly speaking is not following the rules, so that's going to be a problem. But she also goes and visits the Bowery King, you know, the Pigeon King from the last movie, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and she deduces that the gun that was used to kill D'Antonio was given to him by the Pigeon King, so he is also in some hot water because of that. But she also goes to the Ruska Roma lady and finds out that she gave him passage out of the city, which again, not following the rules. And unfortunately, all three of them do get punished. The Pigeon King gets his face slashed to pieces, 7 cuts for 7 bullets. Angelica Houston gets a sword through her helping hands, so she can't use her hands anymore, I guess. And Winston, well, Winston's punishment is a little more long-term. He needs to relinquish control of the New York Continental and find a suitable replacement because it's no longer his responsibility. He's basically fired. But before we get closure on that, we gotta talk about what John's doing in Casablanca, because he's off to find Halle Berry, and she is the manager of the Casablanca Continental, and they go back a long ways. John helped get her daughter out of this life and keep her away from her mom and all the hitman stuff so that she can have a good life and keep it secret and separate from her mom's life, which is kind of sad, but it's also very touching that John would do such a thing for a friend. And that's where the marker comes in, because now she owes John a favor, and John's favor is basically to get him in touch with her old boss, because he knows where the one above the table is, and it's very mysterious who this person is and what power he has, but apparently he has some power that can help get John out of this jam. So they go to her old boss to find some answers, and he's like, well, rules are rules, and I wouldn't be following the rules if I let you guys out alive. So of course a firefight breaks out, and this is probably my favorite action scene of the movie. It's the one with the German shepherds, the dogs, because Halle Berry's character has these two small German shepherd attack dogs that she goes with everywhere, and they're wearing these bulletproof vests. And when they attack. They are a great help in clearing this building of all these enemies. And the way this fight scene is shot, where it'll track one of the dogs doing a stunt, and then it'll tie into what the humans are doing, and just the gunplay, the martial arts, and the dog training, it all looks so impressive and so calculated, but it never feels fake. It all feels very genuine, that these dogs are just exceptionally trained, that they know what they're doing, and they're surprisingly efficient in combat. They do a great job. They're very good boys. But after that fight, John says goodbye to Halle Berry, and he's like, I gotta do this on my own, and he goes into the desert to die, really, because in order to find the Elder, he found out that he has to just walk to the edge of the desert to where he's about to die, and then keep walking, and the Elder will find you. You don't find the Elder. And that's exactly what happens. John passes out in a sand dune, and then he wakes up, and he's in the Elder's hut thing, and the Elder is played by the one guy from the first Wonder Woman movie, you know, the actor, the spy. And he finds John Wick very interesting. He's an interesting guy because, in his own words, he's never seen anybody try so hard to end up right back where he started. Because really, think about it. John Wick was at the top of his game. He was a master assassin. He was in the weeds of that life, and then he fell in love, and he got married, and he wanted out, and he did all he could to get out, and he got out. And then his wife dies, and then his dog dies, and he just gets sucked right back into this life that he didn't really want. But circumstances being what they are, once you dip your toe in, you'll see something reaches out and just pulls you in. And that was Santino D'Antonio in the last movie, which, after his murder, John Wick is in it. He's in it deep now. And the Elder just kind of finds that whole situation amusing and offers him a chance at redemption. He says, if you do this one task for me, then the contract will be canceled. Nobody's going to be after him anymore, but he will be working under the table again. He will have his old life back, his old life as a hitman, doing whatever contract is given to him and being very good at it, which isn't really what John wanted, but given the circumstances, he is willing to accept, and he accepts by giving a pledge to fealty, cutting off his ring finger with the ring still on it and giving it to the Elder, which I always thought, did the Elder really want the finger, or did he want the ring, which is a symbol of his loyalty to his wife, who's dead now, and that's kind of closing the book on that part of his life, that he is now pledging loyalty to the table above all else, including his dead wife? Or did he want an actual showing of blood as a sign of commitment? Or was it both? Because either way, it's a very stunning visual, and it is something that follows John into the next movie, which again, attention to detail in these movies is key, and it just continues. But what is this task that he has to perform? Well, there's a certain manager of a certain Continental named Winston, and he's getting a little too big for his britches, so John Wick has to go and take him out. And yeah, John's not too happy about that, but given the circumstances, and I already said that he accepts, so finger cuts off, he's got to go kill Winston to get the contract canceled. And he goes back to New York City, and he finds out that the situation has deteriorated because the adjudicator's coming, and Winston's not going to just give up the Continental. He's like, I want to see her try. So High Table Goons, along with this one guy, this fanboy named Zero, and he's played by Mark Dacascos, who's this Japanese guy, and I know I've seen his face somewhere, and if you guys recognize him, please let me know in the comments. But Zero leads this raid on the Continental, and again, the stakes are up because these guys are heavily armored, bulletproof from head to toe, the only weak point being the neck where the helmet connects to the rest of the suit. And Winston locks himself into this vault while John and Kayron defend the Continental with their army. And their armed security really doesn't last very long. They're not up to the task of taking on these High Table Goons. But John and Kayron are, and they really do their best to repel this onslaught of bulletproof sharpshooters that just seem to be wiping the floor with everybody else. But then we get another weapons upgrade in these movies because, again, they have the typical pistol, assault rifle, shotgun. And John's got this big 12 gauge number, and he's got armor-piercing slugs that he just shoots, and the dude's heads just explode. It's beautiful. You can't really rapid fire, and you're very limited on ammunition, so you got to make sure every shot counts. And it's just headshot, 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 one after another, and I just loved watching it. And this ramps up to our big third act confrontation where John fights Zero, but before he fights Zero, he's got to fight his students, who are these two guys. I think they're best known from the Raid franchise, but I'll be honest, I never saw any of the Raid movies. I've been told by everybody that I would love them, that I gotta watch them, and eventually I will. But really, I just know them from The Force Awakens. They're the two guys that Han Solo tried to double cross, and they're here, and they're fighting with karambits, which are these cool little swoopy knives with a loop on the end for the pinky or pointer finger, and it's very flippy and fast and very dangerous. John is doing his best to take on these guys, but they are so good, and for me, you think John really has met his match with these guys. But of course, John Wick wins because it's a John Wick movie. How else is it gonna end? So then Zero has to come down and fight him man to man, and that goes on for a while. And I don't know if it's cool or kind of lame that Zero is such a dorky fanboy with John Wick. I don't really know how to take that. It's a little weird from a hero-villain dynamic, but also in the world of the Continental, where John is such a legend, he's so famous, to have a guy trying to kill you that's also kind of a fan of your work, I guess isn't out of the question, and the movie makes it make sense enough. My biggest question is, why does he never call him the Baba Yaga? That's actually something that's weirdly absent throughout the course of this movie. There's not a lot of Baba Yaga talk. I mean, there's quite a bit of it in the first movie, again, dealing with Russians and introducing John Wick as this force of nature, and that did continue into the second movie, because again, you were dealing with a lot more Russians, but here, even when he goes to visit the Ruska Roma people, they don't really refer to him as the Baba Yaga. And again, Zero doesn't refer to him as that either. Really, the only time I remember anyone saying it is at the very end, and it's by Winston. And it's a very effective use of it. It's very memorable, and it's very cool. But I don't know, I'm just kind of surprised that they didn't use it more given the situation. And it's when John eventually kills Zero with a sword through the chest that the adjudicator calls up Winston and wants to parlay, basically saying, okay, let's negotiate. And they do. She shows up on the rooftop with Winston and John, and it goes pretty well. Winston is given back control of the Continental. He's allowed to resume business as usual. But the one factor that the two of them realize they can't reconcile is John. What to do about John. And without missing a beat, Winston just pulls out a pistol and unloads on John, just emptying the clip on this dude. And John's trying to block and cover, but he falls off the roof, smacks his head on like 3 awnings, and splats on the ground, presumed dead. But again, this is a John Wick movie. He's never really dead. But it does seem to appease the adjudicator, for the time being at least, and they go their separate ways. And it seems like the movie's winding down, except for one more reveal that John's alive. He's not dead. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I was sitting down for that one. And he crawls his way, looking way worse for wear, to the foot of the now scarred and sliced up Bowery King. And it seems like they're gonna have their own little alliance going forward. And that's pretty much it for John Wick 3 Parabellum. It's gotta be my favorite at this point. It's so cool from an action perspective, from the staging to the ingenuity of different weaponry to the choreography, the performing of it, the actual execution of it, the camera work, just everything involving the fights, again, feels stepped up from the last movie, which was already a step up from the first movie. And I just can't imagine the action being any better or cleaner than we get in this movie. It's so good. But on top of that, the storyline is very easy to follow. It is just John Wick on the run, being hunted, and trying to reconcile the mistake he made in the last movie, you know, killing D'Antonio in cold blood on Continental grounds. That has consequences. And this movie is just a string of consequences from that moment. But because of that, it doesn't have the same meandering plot that the last movie did, trying to find a purpose for John Wick going forward. Here we have the purpose. The table is after him, and he's trying to escape, basically, by any means necessary. And if he can take down the table in the process, well, that's just the little joys in life. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about John Wick 3 Parabellum? Is it your favorite? I feel like a lot of people's favorite has to be the first one, because it was such a fresh concept, a fresh idea, a fresh story. It had a very clear motivation, and I think on a writing level, that one is probably the best. But this one just has such perfect action from beginning to end. It never lets up, and I just kind of love it. But whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.